Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're gonna be looking at magic cards. Ooh. Do you guys like green, blue, red, white? Ooh, that cool card. Welcome back to Unlocking Unreal Engine. Last time we made our first ever blueprint, we learned what those red boxes are, an event happened, time to run some code, and we learned a little bit about the basics of adding components to our list here and how we use those components to affect the world. And I ended by giving you guys a little bit of homework. You could currently turn the light on, but you couldn't turn the light off. Well, here is the answer. Basically, I'm actually going to copy literally all of this. So I'm going to grab all these nodes except for the event. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, drag the execution pin in over to the branch. And all I simply have to do is take this new visibility, turn it off, and then we need to plug in the other actor to the top of this equal here. And it's pretty much that simple. So now on component begin overlap, we're saying, is it the player? Turn the light on. End overlap, is it the player? Turn it off. With that out of the way, let me know. How did you do? Did you get it solved? Also, do not forget, if you like this series, I do have a Patreon, and it is what helps me make the videos at such a high quality. Your support means the world. Back to the video. Today, we're going to add our own button that the player can press, and instead of us just overlapping with the collision, we are going to hit the button and either turn the light on or off. Again, the blueprint is going to remain pretty primitive. Remember that we're starting with the bare basics and we're building up. So even if you're doing this and you're new and you're like, this doesn't feel right, it's designed that way intentionally. We're slowly introducing new things so that way you can get your hands dirty. And then when we move on to the harder stuff, it makes more sense as to why you might be doing something. So the first thing we need to do is I'm going to hit Control Space and I'm going to open up my content drawer. And I need to go all the way back to content because we are going to go to first person. We're going to go to input and we are going to go to actions. In here, I am going to right click and I am going to go up to input and select an input action. An input action is exactly what it sounds. It is something that takes input from a physical controller. So if you had a PlayStation controller, X square, triangle, circle, A, B, X, Y, the analog sticks, this is how you would define that it needs to pay attention and then give it a definition on how to react. So I'm going to type in IA for input action, underscore, and we're going to just type in the word interact. This is going to be the interact key going forward, so it's going to be important that you follow along with this one. Let's go ahead and open up, actually no, let's hit Control Shift S to save all, then we will open up the input action interact. So what you'll see by default is all this information. However, what we need to pay attention to is the value type. The value type is currently a digital Boolean, which is perfect because we need true or false because it's a button. Is the button pressed? True. Is the button pressed? False. So a digital Boolean works in this case. It's just a button press. So we can go ahead and close the input action interact. Then, if you remember from the first episode, we need to add it to our default input context. I'm going to open up the content drawer, and instead of going all the way back, we're going to go back to input and click. And now you'll see we have IMC default. This is our input mapping context by default. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Once it opens, you'll get something that looks like this. We're going to click on mappings and open that up. And you'll see currently we have jump, move, and look, which are the three things we're currently capable of doing. However, we need to add a mapping. And if we hit this drop down menu, you'll see that in here we have our input action interact. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It is here where we define what button we want this to be attributed to. So I'm going to hit this caret to open up the interact, and you'll see that I get a little keyboard and a drop down thing. Now you can click the drop down and navigate it, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the keyboard and then I'm going to press F. And there you go. It automatically found F for me. Put it in there. My interact key is going to be on F. If you'd like it on something different, go for it. It doesn't really matter. Control Shift S to save all, and I'm going to close the context of defaults. If you remember from the first episode, we are already using the context of default in the player controller, so we don't need to do anything further. If that doesn't sound familiar, remember how we had a bunch of basic settings that were already set up in the first person template? Well, the IMC default was already set up for us. So by adding to it, we're just adding to what's going to be available by default. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, an interact system in first person. We're going to need to be able to look at something, hit a button, and then we interact with it. I'm letting you know right now, we're not ready for that. That'll be within the next couple episodes, but it's not going to be in this one. Again, we're going to be a little primitive, but follow along. Now, I know you just made this and we have to delete your homework, but we do have to delete your homework. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to keep the the overlap event for both the overlap and ending the overlap. What we're going to do is just delete the visibility of the point light, because we're going to add some additional functionality. So by default, something you have to understand is blueprints aren't listening for your inputs. For example, even whenever I make a pawn, like the default first person character, this guy right here, you know, the capsule, the arms, and the camera, it's not listening for your input by default. The only reason it's receiving our input is because it's the selected default pawn in the game settings. So when we look at something like the light system, for example, we can't just immediately put input into this and expect it to respond. We need to make an event happen so we can run some code so it knows to listen. And the way we are going to accomplish that is with the player controller. Because if you remember, what's happening is the player controller is possessing this pawn. And because the player controller possesses the pawn, its inputs directly influence that pawn. So in our light system, if we were to right click on the event graph and type in get, remember there's get and there's set. In this case, we just need to retrieve something. So we are going to get the player controller. You'll note that we get this nice little function that receives the player controller for us. Now, just so I can explain this, because I don't think I have yet, the player index is for if you have multiple players. If you're making a multiplayer game, the player index indicates which one you're talking about. So note that in programming, most of the time, 0 is the first. Anytime you have a list, so in this case, a potential list of player controllers, 0 is going to be the first. This is due to something called an array, which is also just a list. Regardless, we have the player index of 0, so the first player controller, because we're not doing multiplayer, we're going to take out the return value, because if you remember, this is context sensitive. Do you remember from last episode? If we pull out of the point light, we can adjust color. But if I was to pull out of, say, the player controller, adjusting the color won't be there because you can't adjust the color of the player controller. So by pulling out of the player controller, I can do things like enable input. So now when I click this and I take the execution pin from true to enable input, what we're saying is if something overlaps this collision and it's the player, enable input for this player controller. Actually, if you look, the engine did something a little bit silly. Take a look at the enable input. Right now we have the execution pin plugged in, we have a target, and then we have an empty player controller. What the engine did was it had to make a choice. Is it talking about giving the player controller input? Or is it talking about, I don't even know what this would mean. The point is, we need to undo the target and we need to make this the player controller. The target should be self because we're in the blueprint of light system. So self is BP light system. And the player controller we're giving input to is the player index 0 of get player controller. And then if the player is not over the collision, we need to get rid of that input so they're not globally interacting with the light system. Now you can just get another get player controller, or in cases like this where the code ends up being a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Where it mimics on each side. Similar? No. Regardless, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out of the player controller, but now we're going to disable input. And again, it shows target. The target is not the player controller, the target is self, the player controller is the player controller, and then true over to the disable input execution pin, and voila. So if you can see here, we get close, it's us, give us input. We get too far away, it's us, disable input. So now that we've done that, what we need to do is we need to right click somewhere in the event graph, and we need to bind that F key that we made earlier, the interact, to some kind of event that we want to have happen. If you remember, the terminology is a input action. So I'm going to type in input action just like that. And you'll notice that we have a couple of things here. We have enhanced action values and we have enhanced action events. However, if you've been paying attention to the terminology, you'll know we want the event. Remember, events are red. It means something happened. We need to run some code. So if you look, we have our input action of interact. So I'm going to click it and notice we get a red box here for when we press F. So what I'm going to do is I am going to hit this little caret here, and it'll give us all the options that we possibly could need. We have triggered, started, ongoing, canceled, and completed. So triggered is basically, do you know what rapid fire means? Have you ever held down a key on your keyboard and it just kept putting that key in? For example, let's go up here to the search panel and the details. I'll show you what I mean. If I hold H, watch. Every single one of those is going to fire the triggered event, this first execution pin. So we don't want that. What we want is started. Started means they've pressed the button. It's as simple as that. It's not going to go off every single time it wants to put another H or F or whatever. So out of started, I am going to type in, actually, I'm not going to do that at all. We need a reference to our point light, remember? So what we need to do is we need to take our point light and we just came across an interesting problem we haven't solved yet. Because if we press the button and the light's off, we want it to turn on, but otherwise we want it to turn off. There's multiple ways we can go about this, but luckily, to save a little bit of space in memory, and I'm talking a minuscule amount, what we can do is we can actually get a certain value, and then based on that information, we can then set that value to what we want. So for example, if we get is visible, or get visible rather, and press enter, all of a sudden you'll notice we get a red, which means Boolean. If you remember, Booleans can be plugged into branches. Now you can right click and we can type in branch, or the way I recommend, hold B and click in the event graph, we'll get a branch. So then we can pull this out and plug it in. We'll take our started execution pin, plug it into the branch. I will close up that caret to make it a little bit more compact. And if we right click on the branch down here in the node comment, we can simply say, is the light currently on? So if true, we know the light is on, which means we need to turn it off. So I'm going to go ahead and get another reference to our point light. You can have as many out as you want, whatever makes sense to make it nice and clean. And out of point light, I'm going to set, instead of get, we're going to set the visibility to false. So I'll take the true, I'll plug it in like that. And then, is the light visible? If no, we need to come out of the point light and say set visibility and set it to true. So out of false, plug that set visibility in like that and set it to true. So now we have a nice little toggle. It'll check to see if it's on and do the opposite. So we've gone through a lot of little stuff. So let's just recap real quick. I'm gonna save and compile. By default, this blueprint doesn't care if we're pressing F. So we have a box component that's going to make sure that it's us whenever we overlap it. And then it's going to give us input. And then if we get too far away, it can continue to ignore our input by disabling it if we get too far away and it was us. However, while we have input, it's going to be listening to our input actions. So we created a new one called interact that is on the F key. And when we press it out of the started pin, because we don't want it to rapid fire, we are going to check and see, is the point light currently visible? If it is, we're going to set its new visibility to false. If it is not visible, we are going to set its new visibility to true. So let's go give it a try. I'm going to save and compile. We're going to go to the first person map and I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Now, I'm going to turn and start spamming F, and you'll notice nothing is happening. If I get close, though, and I start hitting F, you'll notice that the light starts to turn on and off because it's now enabled on our input, and it's taking our input. I can leave the light on. I can then walk away, and if I start spamming F, notice it no longer receives our input. But again, if I return and I start hitting F, the light turns on and off. Now, a lot of you are going to think this part is boring, but it's absolutely essential, and I will beat it into you that you absolutely need to start doing this. What we're going to do now is we're going to grab this bottom set of code. I'm going to move it down, and with it still selected, I'm going to press C, which creates a nice little box around it. This is known as a comment. And what I'm going to do is I like to make one big comment around all of a specific type of code, and then add the smaller ones like we've been adding to the branches for more specific parts of the code on the inside of the comment. So in this case, I'm going to type in interact. And then because this is an interact event, I like to use the color red. So I'm going to change the color of this to red. And the way I did that, by the way, I did that a bit quick, is to click on the comment. And then on the right hand side, I'm going to go to the comment color and make it red. Something else I like to do is see show bubble when zoomed. I like to click on this and notice what happens when I zoom really far out. Let's say it's a really in-depth blueprint. I can immediately find where my interact code is. One, because it's color coded, and two, the bubble now appears to let us know that this is indeed the interact. Then what we'll do is up here, I'm going to grab all of this code. I'm going to press C. And you can name this anything you want as long as it makes sense. I'm going to go with proximity check. And again, to me, this is still a little bit of a player input sort of thing. I know it's like proximity and overlapping, but in my brain, it makes sense. So I'm going to make this red as well by taking the green and the blue away. And then, of course, I will take the bubble when zoomed and click it like that. You'll see our event tick is in the way. I'm going to go ahead and just delete these 3 nodes. There we go. And then I'm going to hit save and compile. And you've done it. You've added a new key to your game and allowed a blueprint to detect whether or not it should interact with the key and respond accordingly. However, today's homework is going to be a little complicated. Let's see if you can manage it. You will have to do something we haven't discussed yet, but I believe in you. And if you're going to be a good game dev, you have to be able to solve problems without someone showing you first. Not even trying to be mean, by the way. It's just true. What if I told you I'm completely self-taught? Because I am. Aside from, like you, I started with YouTube videos, but to learn all of this, there's no way YouTube was getting me there. Regardless, today's homework is going to involve this. If the player is indeed close enough and has input, change the color of the light to something new. If you can only get it to change color once, that's fine. However, if you really want to push the bounds of what you know, make it change to a different color every time you press the interact button. Now that color can cycle between a few, but see if you can make it change between a few colors. If you're liking the series, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. You guys have been awesome. I'm loving making this series. Again, I have a Patreon. It's how I make this series possible. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it. I sound like Ensum, but I'll see you guys in the next video.